The bridge of the UNSCS Valiant was quiet when the alert came through Commander Kyle. Harrison had been reviewing supply manifests at his station. The kind of routine work that filled most days in deep space patrol. The communications array suddenly came alive with a distress signal that cut through the usual hum of background noise. The frequency was old, encrypted with protocols that were rarely used anymore. But every officer on the bridge recognized what it meant immediately. A human vessel was in trouble. Captain Lauren Mitchell looked up from her tactical display, her dark eyes focused on the fast of the incoming signal as Commander Marcus moved closer to the communications console. The message was fragmented, broken by interference and the massive distance between the Pathfinder and the Valiant. But the desperation in the transmission was unmistakable. Victoria Lang's voice crackled through the speakers. Her words came fast and desperate, barely coherent between bursts of static. The Pathfinder had discovered something they should not have discovered. A weapons facility hidden in a region of space that belonged to no one. A place where the Zara Syndicate operated in the shadows. Far from the eyes of any government or galactic authority, the Pathfinder had been a science vessel, designed for exploration and research, not for combat. The crew included scientists, engineers, and support staff. People who studied the stars and cataloged planets. They were not warriors. And they had not expected to find what they had found: rows of biological weapons, containment systems that held horrors beyond imagination, technology that violated every treaty the galactic community had ever created. But they had found it. And now the Zarath knew they had found it. Captain Lauren took a breath and moved toward the tactical display. Her movements were calm despite the tension that now filled the bridge. She had been a captain for 7 years, and in that time she had learned that panic was contagious. People looked to their commanding officer in moments of crisis. They watched the captain's face, the way she held her body, the tone of her voice. They needed to believe their leader had a plan. The distance between the Valiant and the Pathfinder was exactly 480 million kilometers, which translated to 22 hours at maximum velocity if there were no delays. No complications, no surprises. Most of the nearby military vessels were farther away. Some were nearly 2 days distant. Some were in other sectors. Entirely, the Valiant was the closest human military asset to the distress call. Commander Kyle Harrison had already begun calculating trajectories. His fingers moved across his base console with practiced precision. He was running multiple scenarios, looking at fuel consumption, weapons capacity, the current position of all known Zarath vessels in the sector. The numbers were not good. The odds were not in their favor. Captain Lauren did not ask for the numbers. Kyle gave them to her anyway. His voice was steady and professional, but she could hear the tension underneath. 2 Zarath patrol vessels were known to be in the region, possibly 3. The Pathfinder had weapons, but they were designed for defense against asteroids and minor threats, not for engaging military-grade combat vessels. The crew had no military training. The research vessel was not designed for battle, and the Pathfinder's shields were already damaged from something. Kyle was not sure what, but the distress signal had broken up, just as Dr. Lang was describing some kind of attack or impact. Captain Lauren looked around the bridge at her crew. She saw the focus in their eyes, the set of their jaws, the way their hands were positioned. At their stations, everyone was waiting for her to make a decision. Everyone was waiting to hear what they were going to do. The logical choice would be to wait. It would be to send a message to Central Command and let them coordinate a response with multiple vessels. It would be to maintain distance and safety until the odds improved. The logical choice would be to preserve the Valiant and its crew. But Dr. Victoria Lang had mentioned something in her last transmission. something that had come through the static just before the signal had become too broken to understand. Clearly 3 children. She had said 3 children. One of the scientists had brought a family with her. A supply officer had his son with him, and one of the younger research technicians had her sister, a 6-year-old girl, visiting the vessel for a month-long scientific exchange program. 3 children waiting on a science vessel while weapons facility guards decided whether to kill everyone aboard or let them escape. Captain Lauren made her decision. She did not make it with a committee. She did not call for a vote. She did not ask for permission from Central Command. She made the choice that her training told her was reckless and her conscience told her was right. She looked at Engineer David Cross. "I need maximum velocity," she said. "Everything this ship can give me." David's face showed surprise for just a moment, then determination. He nodded and moved toward his engineering station. She looked at Communications Officer Grace Miller. "Keep that channel open, no matter what. Keep reaching out to the Pathfinder. Let them know we are coming." Grace's hands were already moving across her console, recalibrating the communications array to compensate for the distance and the interference. She looked at First Officer Commander Marcus. "Battle stations. But quiet weapons, hot but passive. We do not fire unless they fire first." Marcus did not question the order. He began moving through the bridge, his voice steady as he relayed the commands to the rest of the ship. The Valiant had been built for speed as much as for combat. The Battlecruiser's engines were legendary in human naval circles, the kind of engines that pilots talked about in bars and sailors mentioned with respect when discussing which vessels could outrun a bad situation. But they were not meant to be pushed like this. They were not meant to be driven at full capacity for 22 hours straight. They were not meant to be asked for more than they were designed to give. Engineer David Cross began pushing them harder anyway. He redirected power from non-essential systems. He routed energy through pathways that made the chief engineer wince. He nursed those engines like a musician playing an instrument at the edge of what it could handle, coaxing out every possible kilowatt of power. The ship shuddered as it accelerated. The inertial dampeners worked overtime to keep the acceleration from killing the crew. The stars on the main view screen began to smear and shift as the Valiant pushed faster and faster into the black. Captain Lauren stayed on the bridge. The weight of her decision settled on her shoulders like a physical thing. She had just committed her ship, her crew, and her career to a course of action that had no guarantee of success. She had chosen sacrifice over safety. But when she heard Dr. Victoria Lang's voice come through the communications channel, when she heard the relief and hope that entered the woman's voice as Grace Miller relayed that the Valiant was on the way and moving fast, Captain Lauren knew her decision was right. The Valiant was closing in, and the galaxy was about to learn something about human beings that many species had forgotten. Humans do not abandon their own. The Valiant tore through space like a creature possessed, its engines screaming at levels that made maintenance workers throughout the ship hold their breath and pray. Engineer David Cross had moved himself into the main engineering chamber where he could monitor every system, every reading, every fluctuation in power distribution. His team worked around him, their movements quick and efficient, checking connections and shunting power through backup conduits when the primary systems began to overheat. The ship was not designed to be pushed like this, but David had always known that specifications and regulations were written by people who had never been in a real crisis. He began making adjustments that would have made his instructors at the Naval Academy wince. He rerouted coolant systems. He borrowed power from the hydroponics bay and the recreational facilities. He even tapped into the reserve power meant for emergency life support to feed just a little more energy to the main drives up on the bridge. Captain Lauren maintained her steady presence, even as the ship groaned and vibrated around her. The inertial dampeners were working at maximum capacity, keeping the acceleration from crushing the crew, but everyone could feel the strain. The bridge. Lights flickered occasionally as power was diverted to the engines. The deck plates hummed with a frequency that was almost musical. Almost hypnotic communications officer Grace Miller kept the channel open to the Pathfinder. Her voice was calm and measured as she relayed updates to the terrified crew still waiting in deep space. She told them how far away the Valiant was, how fast it was traveling, how long it would take to arrive. Her voice was a lifeline to 23 people who were running out of time. The messages coming back from Dr. Victoria Lang became more desperate as time passed. The Pathfinder's shields were failing faster than their calculations had predicted. The Zareth vessel that was hunting them was closing in, moving with methodical precision toward its target. The crew had attempted to flee, but the Pathfinder's engines were not designed for speed. They were not combat vessels. They could only run, and they could not run fast enough. Lang's latest message came through broken and desperate. We have 17 minutes, maybe less, before they reach firing range. Her voice wavered, and in that moment, the entire bridge of the Valiant could hear the fear of a woman who knew she and her crew were likely going to die. We have children aboard. Captain Mitchell, we have 3 children. Grace Miller's hand tightened on her console. The crew understood what that meant. The 3 children suddenly became real, became individuals with faces and families and futures that would never exist if the Valiant did not arrive in time. Tactical Officer Ryan Chun was running probability models, looking at the scenarios, calculating the likelihood of success. The numbers were not favorable. 1 human battlecruiser against potentially 3 Zareth vessels was not a battle you won through firepower alone. It was not even a battle you could win at all by any rational calculation. But Ryan had learned long ago that battles were rarely won by rational calculation. They were won by speed and courage, and by making your enemy question their assumptions. Ryan began suggesting maneuvers to Captain Lauren, movements that defied conventional tactical doctrine, approaches that made the other officers raise their eyebrows when they heard them described. But Captain Lauren listened to her tactical officer because she had learned to trust his instincts. She had learned that sometimes the craziest maneuver was the one your enemy would never expect. Medical Officer Dr. Sarah Mitchell had begun preparing the medical bay for casualties. She did not know if there would be survivors from the Pathfinder, or if the Valiant itself would take damage serious enough to require emergency medical response. But she prepared anyway. She had learned that hope was a tool you used when fighting for people's lives. Her staff moved around her, setting up additional triage areas, preparing emergency protocols, testing life support systems in the medical. Phased hours ticked by with agonizing slowness for the crew of the Valiant. Time seemed to move in a strange way when you were falling towards something at maximum velocity, when you knew that the outcome of the next few hours would determine whether people lived or died. Time became elastic. It moved slowly in some moments, and impossibly fast in others. Captain Lauren called a meeting of her senior officers. Just to make sure everyone understood the plan, they gathered in the briefing room, and she explained what she intended to do. Ryan would be piloting the most aggressive approach vector the Valiant's computer would allow them to program. Grace would be maintaining constant communication with the Pathfinder. David would be managing the engines and making sure that if an emergency jump to faster than light space became necessary, the ship would have just enough power to accomplish it. Kyle would be coordinating all tactical responses and monitoring the Zareth positions. Captain Lauren did not sugarcoat the situation. Everyone in that room knew the odds. They knew that this was likely to end badly for at least some of them, but they also knew that the alternative was to watch an empty space where 23 people and 3 children used to be, and none of them could accept that outcome. The message came through from Dr. Victoria Lang at hour 19. The Pathfinder was losing power in sections of the ship. The Zarth vessel was now visible on long-range sensors. The hunters were closing in for the kill. The prey was running out of places to hide. Grace Miller relayed the information with her voice, steady and professional. But everyone on the bridge could hear the stress beneath the calm exterior. She had been speaking with Dr. Victoria Lang for nearly 20 hours now. She had heard the woman's voice grow more desperate, more afraid, more human with each transmission. She had become connected to these people, not by blood or by choice, but by the simple act of listening to their terror and refusing to let that signal fade into silence. Ryan Chun pulled up the latest approach calculations. The Valiant would arrive in just under 3 hours 17 minutes after the Zorath vessel reached optimal firing range. 17 minutes might as well have been 17 years in this context. But 17 minutes was also enough time for a skilled pilot to attempt something impossible. It was enough time for a crew that believed in what they were doing to accomplish miracles. Captain Lauren gave the order to move all non-essential personnel to the shelters in the deepest parts of the ship away from the hull, where enemy weapons were most likely to strike. She gave the order to prepare the shuttle bays for emergency evacuation protocols. She gave the order that told everyone aboard the Beyond Valiant that they were about to go to war. The ship accelerated even faster, pushing past safe limits into dangerous territory. The engines shrieked. The crew felt the stress in their bones. The Valiant was no longer a peacetime patrol vessel. It had become a weapon pointed directly at the Zareth forces that threatened human lives. The Valiant emerged from faster-than-light space with its weapons already hot and its shields raised to maximum. The transition from the smooth flow of superluminal travel to the violent reality of normal space felt like diving from a cliff into Wi-Fi's dark water. The ship's sensors immediately painted a picture of the tactical situation. And it was worse than anyone had hoped. The Pathfinder was there, a small science vessel that looked fragile and broken. The lead Zarth cruiser was already launching its first volley. Plasma weapons designed to cut through shields and tear apart hull plating in a matter of seconds. The Pathfinder's shields were failing exactly as Dr. Victoria Lang had said they were. The vessel was dying in the cold dark of space, and its crew was watching death approach from above. Captain Lauren did not hesitate. She gave the order to launch countermeasures and position the Valiant between the Pathfinder and the incoming fire. Her crew responded with the kind of professional speed that came from hundreds of hours of training and drills. Ryan Chun pulled the Battlecruiser into a movement that should have torn the ship apart, but somehow held together. The inertial dampeners screamed as they compensated for the sudden acceleration. The incoming plasma struck the Valiant's shields head-on. The impact shook the entire ship. Crew members throughout the vessel were thrown from their stations or sent sprawling to the deck. The lights flickered and died in several sections before emergency power kicked in. Damage reports began flooding into tactical. The shields held, but barely. The Valiant's defensive systems had absorbed the first strike that would have obliterated the Pathfinder. The science vessel's entire crew became debtors to the Battlecruiser and its captain, and they knew it. Grace Miller's hands shook slightly as she sent the evacuation order to the Pathfinder. She told them to prepare all shuttles to dock with the Valiant. She told them they had maybe 5 minutes, possibly less. Captain Lauren was buying them time with her own ship, and they needed to move fast. The Zareth vessels were adjusting their approach. The initial shock of the human warship's sudden arrival had disrupted their coordinated attack, but they were recovering quickly. The lead cruiser was maneuvering to get a clear line of fire at the Valiant, while the support vessels were moving to encircle the human ship, to trap it between their weapons and trap it. Good Kyle Harrison was calling out damage reports as they came in. Shields at 73% and dropping multiple hull breaches in sections 2 and 4. Forward weapon systems damaged but still operational. The ship was bleeding power and losing hull integrity. but it was still fighting maintenance. Officer Jake Foster was already moving through the lower decks with his team. Working to reroute power systems and seal bulkheads, he was doing the 1,000 small things that kept a warship functional in combat. The invisible work that happened in the places that nobody ever thought about until something broke. The crew throughout the ship depended on people like Jake to keep essential systems operating. Engineer David Cross was pushing the engines even harder. The Valiant needed to maneuver, needed to position itself correctly, needed to shield the evacuation shuttles from enemy fire while they docked and filled with desperate refugees. David was delivering the power that Ryan needed to make the ship dance, to move it with the kind of precision and speed that kept people alive. The first shuttle from the Pathfinder detached and began moving toward the Valiant's hangar bay. The small craft was slow and vulnerable, a sitting target for any Zarath weapons that decided to track it. Captain Lauren immediately adjusted the Valiant's position to block any direct line of fire at the evacuation craft. Her ship took another hit as a consequence, this time on the starboard side. The impact sent a shockwave through the entire vessel. Sarah Mitchell and her medical team caught the impact. They were knocked around the medical bay. Despite the inertial dampeners, the captain was deliberately taking hits to protect people trying to escape, and everyone understood what that meant. The Valiant was becoming a shield, a living barrier between the Pathfinder's crew and death. Grace Miller was coordinating with the second shuttle now. The evacuation was moving faster than it should have been possible. The Pathfinder's crew understood that they were running out of time, understood that the Valiant could not take much more punishment. The crew moved with the kind of urgency that came from knowing their survival depended on moving fast. Ryan Chen executed a maneuver that took the Valiant away from the Zarath fire lanes, but kept the ship positioned to block any attacks on the evacuating shuttles. His hands moved across his console with the precision of someone playing an instrument he had mastered long ago. The ship responded to his intentions, cutting through space with grace and power. The third and final shuttle was launching from the Pathfinder. Dr. Victoria Lang's voice came through the communication channel one final time. She was going to be on that last shuttle. She was not abandoning her post until everyone else was safe. The captain of the science vessel had learned the same lesson that Captain Lauren had learned somewhere in her training or somewhere in her heart. The lesson that the captain was the last person to leave weapons fire erupted again. The Zarath were adapting to the Valiant's defensive posture. They were beginning to understand that the human ship was not interested in attacking them. It was interested only in protecting the evacuation. The realization did not make them merciful. It made them more aggressive, because if the human ship would not fight back effectively, then it could be destroyed while still protecting its charges. The shields flickered at 38%. The Valiant had taken more damage in the last 3 minutes than it had taken in its entire previous operational history. The ship was failing. The crew knew it, but they held their positions. They maintained the shield. They bought the time that the evacuating shuttles needed. The final shuttle detached and accelerated toward the Valiant's hangar bay. The small craft carrying Dr. Victoria Lang and the remaining crew of the Pathfinder moved through space with slow determination, moving away from its dying ship toward the human vessel that had come to save them. Captain Lauren watched the shuttle dock. She watched the bay doors close. She watched as the Pathfinder's crew entered the safety of the Valiant. Captain Lauren knew that the most difficult part of this battle was about to begin. Now that the evacuees were safe inside her ship, now that she had accomplished the mission objective, she had to keep her ship alive long enough to get all these people away from here, alive. The moment the Pathfinder's crew was safely aboard the Valiant, Captain Lauren made a decision that would echo through the history books of 3 galactic empires. She did not order a retreat. She did not order her ship to jump to faster than light space while the engines were still badly damaged. She gave an order that defied every principle of conventional military. Strategy, she ordered an attack. Commander Marcus heard the order and repeated it back to confirm he had understood correctly. Captain Lauren nodded. Once the Valiant's weapons came to life, all the firepower that the battlecruiser could muster was directed at the largest Zarth vessel. The human ship moved toward its enemy with velocity and aggression that shocked everyone. Watching Ryan Chen brought the Valiant into a direct approach vector at the lead Zareth cruiser. The maneuver was tactically insane but strategically brilliant by moving directly toward the enemy at maximum velocity. By making it clear that the Valiant intended to close the distance and fight at point-blank range, Captain Lauren forced the Zareth to focus their attention on the human warship rather than on the vulnerable shuttles that were docking and the wounded science vessel that was being protected. The Zareth commander, a being named Kethrus, who had served in the Syndicate fleets for 20 standard years, experienced something he had never experienced before in combat. He felt confusion. The human ship was not moving to escape. It was not maneuvering defensively to minimize damage. It was moving to engage. It was moving like it wanted to close the distance and grapple with his ship. The Zareth commander had fought humans before, but humans were predictable. Humans followed logical, tactical doctrine. Humans understood that superior firepower meant certain death. This UN captain did not understand that Captain Lauren's tactical mind was working on multiple levels simultaneously. She was not trying to win this battle through superior firepower. She was not trying to match the Zareth vessel weapons for weapons, because she could not. She had approximately 70% of the firepower of the lead Zareth cruiser, and considerably less than the combined firepower of all three Zareth vessels. The odds were impossible by any logical analysis, but Captain Lauren was drawing on something deeper than logic. She was drawing on thousands of years of human naval tradition. The lesson, taught in academies and in bars and in the stories that sailors told each other. The lesson that sometimes the most powerful weapon was the willingness to sacrifice yourself for people weaker than youth. Valiant charged directly at the Zareth vessel. Its shields were failing. Its hull was breached in multiple sections. Its crew was exhausted from hours of combat. It charged forward anyway. Weapons fire became constant. The Zareth could not believe what they were seeing. A ship that should have been running was instead attacking them. A captain who should have been trying to save her own crew was instead putting her ship directly in the path of their weapons to protect. Evacuees and Servivore Scrolls gave the order to fire everything. The coordinated assault from all three Zareth vessels should have turned the Valiant into debris and memory, should have obliterated the human ship completely, should have left nothing but expanding clouds of superheated plasma where the battlecruiser had been. But something unexpected happened. Ryan Chen, moving with instinct and years of training, pushed the Valiant into a maneuver that defied physics. She had expected this sequence of attacks. She had calculated trajectories and weapon spread patterns. The Zareth were coordinating their fire with their standard patterns, with their logical mathematical approaches to targeting. But Ryan was flying with something more intuitive, something that grew from human flexibility and human unpredictability. The shield flared as weapons struck, but not where they were aimed. The Valiant took damage, but not critical damage. The ship moved through the storm of plasma, fire like a dancer moving through a crowd, knowing when to step left, knowing when to duck, knowing when to slide. Right? The ship that should have been destroyed. Servivid Crow stared at his tactical display, unable to understand what he was seeing. The mathematical model said the human ship should be dead. The calculations were clear and unambiguous. The human vessel should have been vaporized in the first seconds of the coordinated assault, but it had not been. The ship was battered and broken, but it was not dead. Zareth commander ordered a second coordinated attack, but this time something different happened. This time, Captain Lauren did something that made Kethrus understand that he was fighting something outside of his experience. She did not order evasive action. She did not order a strategic retreat. She did not order anything that was about the Valiant's survival. She ordered the weapons officers to transmit something to Central Command. She ordered the tactical computers to record and broadcast the evidence of the bioweapons facility that the Pathfinder scientists had discovered. She made sure that even if her ship was destroyed, even if every person aboard the Valiant died in the next moments, the truth about the Xyarth crimes would reach the galactic authorities, and that moment Kethros understood that he was not fighting a military tactic. He was fighting human determination. He was fighting a captain who had decided that some things were more important than survival, that delivering the truth was more important than protecting her own life, that saving innocent people was worth any price. The realization distracted him. For a fraction of a second, for the briefest moment, his attention wavered from the targeting calculations, and in that moment Ryan Chun made a maneuver that should have been impossible. The Valiant moved in a direction that the Zorath weapon systems had not predicted. The coordinated attack missed by fractions of a second. The weapons that should have torn the human ship to pieces instead struck empty space. The ships that should have crushed the Valiant with their combined firepower instead struck each other. In the confusion and miscalculation, friendly fire damage erupted across the Zarath formation. The largest cruiser took a direct hit from one of its own support vessels. The formation that had been so precisely coordinated became scattered. For the first time in the battle, the human ship had room to breathe. For the first time, the odds had shifted not toward human victory, but away from human defeat. Captain Lauren took that moment of confusion and gave an order that would later be studied in tactical academies. She did not order a counterattack. She did not order her weapons to press the advantage. She ordered the Valiant to position itself between the recovering Zarath vessels and the vulnerable shuttles that were still loading evacuees. She made her ship a living shield again, but this time it was a shield that had proven it could fight back. The Zarath commander stared at the human captain's decision and understood something fundamental about his enemy. Humans did not think the way Zarath thought. Humans did not make decisions based purely on mathematics and probability. They made decisions based on values and principles and the strange human belief that some things were worth dying for in that moment. On the bridge of his flagship, Kethros made a decision that would change the course of the entire conflict. He ordered his vessels to stand down from combat. He did not retreat. He did not disengage. But he ordered his weapons to cease fire. The reason he would later give was tactical. The human ship was not worth destroying if it was going to cost him his flagship, if it was going to cause friendly fire casualties. The reason he did not voice, but understood in his heart, was different. He understood that he was facing something that could not be conquered through superior firepower. He was facing human will. The bridge of the Valiant fell silent when the Zarath weapons fire ceased. The sudden absence of constant explosions and alarms created a void that was almost painful in its contrast to the chaos of the previous hours. Captain Lauren allowed herself to breathe for just a moment, but only a moment. The Pathfinder's crew was safe aboard. The evidence of the bioweapons facility was being transmitted to Central Command through multiple redundant channels. The evacuation was complete, but the Valiant was dying. The ship's systems were failing one by one. Power reserves were at critical levels. The engines that had burned so bright and pushed so hard were now running on fumes. Kyle Harrison had been running calculations constantly throughout the battle. Now he approached Captain Lauren with a datapad and a grim expression. The Valiant could not maintain current velocity indefinitely. The engines needed rest and repair. The shields were barely holding on line. One more sustained combat assault would breach the hull beyond the capacity of the automated repair systems. The choices were clear, and both were terrible. The first choice was to surrender. The Zarath would likely accept. The human ship had proven itself worthy of respect, and Kethros seemed to be the kind of commander who understood honor and tactical recognition. The crew Pathfinder survivors could probably be ransomed or traded back to human authorities within weeks. The second choice was to attempt an emergency jump to faster-than-light space to retreat from the battle space before the Zareth changed their minds. The problem with this choice was that the engines were damaged severely. A jump at high warp could cause a catastrophic failure that would destroy the ship and kill everyone aboard. There was maybe a 20% chance of survival if they attempted it. Captain Lauren looked around her bridge. The crew was exhausted but still alert. Grace Miller had tears on her face from the stress of coordinating. The evacuation doctor, Sarah Mitchell, had sent a message that the medical bay was running at capacity with injured crew members from both the Pathfinder and the Valiant Ryan. Chen was slumped in his pilot's seat, his hands still resting on the controls. He had guided the Valiant through an impossible battle, and his entire body was shaking with adrenaline exhaustion. Engineer David Cross had sent a message through Commander Marcus that the engines would give them one more jump. Maybe, but not much more than that. The 3 children from the Pathfinder were in the shelter now. The 6-year-old girl was with her sister. The other 2 children were with their parents. All of them were safe. All of them had survived because of the choice that Captain Lauren had made. She thought about what she had always been taught in the academy, that a captain's primary responsibility was the safety of her crew. But she was also taught that sometimes you had to believe in principles more important than individual safety. Sometimes you had to believe in duty and honor and the strange human conviction that protecting the innocent was worth any cost. Captain Lauren made her final decision. She did not make it with a committee. She did not ask for consensus. She made it as a captain who had accepted the weight of command and understood the responsibility that came with it. She would not surrender. She would not accept the safe choice that let everyone live a little longer in captivity or subjugation. She would choose the human way. She would choose action over passivity, courage over surrender. She looked at Engineer David Cross through the communication system and gave him the order. I need 1 jump. David, 1 jump is all we need. Take us home. David's response came back immediately. His voice was steady and professional. You will get that jump. Captain. She looked at Ryan Chun at his position in the pilot's seat. Set course for the nearest jump. Point Ryan, make it fast. Ryan's hands were already moving across his console, his exhaustion falling away, replaced by focus and determination. She looked at Grace Miller. Tell the Zarth commander that we are jumping. They cannot follow us into faster than light space. Tell him that his crimes have been recorded and reported. Tell him that his days of operating in shadow are over. Grace's hands moved across her console, relaying the message to the Zareth vessels. The Zareth commander's response came back almost immediately. Cathros did not threaten. He did not promise retaliation. He simply acknowledged the human captain's choice, and that acknowledgement carried more weight than any threat could have. The Meyer Valiant began accelerating toward the jump point. The Zareth vessels did not move. They did not move to intercept. They did not move to prevent the escape. They simply watched as the human battlecruiser moved toward the threshold between normal space and faster than light travel. The stars ahead of the Valiant began to shift. The mathematics of faster than light space started to bend the light around them. The ship moved toward the jump point with every ounce of power David Cross could coax from the dying engines. The ship was not just a machine anymore. It was an act of defiance. It was a testament to human will. The engines screamed. Their sound was almost musical, almost transcendent. The power requirements spiked to levels that should have shut down the system multiple times. But David Cross was a magician at his station, and he held everything together through will and skill and an understanding of his ship that went beyond the technical specifications. The jump point drew near. The Valiant accelerated past the breaking point, past the limits of what even a human crew could endure. The inertial dampeners worked overtime. The ship's frame groaned under the strain, and Then they were through, the stars stretched into lines, the normal universe fell away behind them. The Valiant existed in the strange borderland between spaces, between realities, between the normal and the impossible. The darkness of faster-than-light space surrounded them, and on the bridge of the Valiant the crew began to process what they had just accomplished, what they had survived. They had gone into an impossible situation. They had rescued innocents. They had defeated an enemy that should have defeated them. They had brought home the evidence that would bring down the Zara Syndicate captain. Lauren felt the weight of command settle fully on her shoulders now, but it was different now. It was mixed with something that felt like rightness, like the knowledge that she had made, the choices that could be made. She had put her ship and her crew in danger to save people who could not save themselves, and they had all survived. Weeks later, the Galactic Council convened. The evidence from the Pathfinder team was presented to the assembled governments and authorities. The Zarath bioweapons program was exposed. The Zarath Syndicate began to unravel as worlds and authorities cut off their support and collaboration. The organization that had operated in shadow for decades found itself brought into the light through the actions of a human captain, and her crew captain Lauren Mitchell received commendations from every human government organization that had them. She was invited to speak at academies and universities. She was honored at ceremonies and celebrations, but in the quiet moments in her quarters late at night, she thought about the people who had made it possible. She thought about engineer David Cross, who had pushed his engines beyond reasonable limits and found that humans could do impossible things if the cause was right. She thought about Ryan Chun, who had flown with instinct and courage and had guided the Valiant through a storm of plasma fire. She thought about Grace Miller, whose voice had been a lifeline to desperate people in the darkness of space. She thought about all the crew members who had done their duty, who had maintained systems and saved lives and believed in what their captain was doing. She thought about the 3 children who were alive now, who would grow up and have futures because of the choice that one captain had made. The legend of the Valiant spread through the stars. When other species encountered humans in the future, they thought of this story. They remembered that humans did not always make the logical choice. Sometimes they made the right choice, and sometimes the right choice was to believe that some things were worth dying for. And sometimes when humans chose that path, miracles happened.